Got a treat for you today on the Vandy Program. My good friend Sean McGinnis is here, and he is part of the team behind something called the Manager Vault. We'll hear about that in just a little bit. I think there's great tools in there for people who have maybe moved their way into management or want to get into middle management or management, higher management, and figure out what's it all about? How's it work? So, with that clumsy intro aside, Sean McGinnis, welcome to the program.
Having me, Dave. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. You're looking well. So you are somewhere in
Ohio.
Ohio.
Yeah, Northeast Ohio. We're in the Cleveland suburb.
Okay, and I've been told that Ohio doesn't exist. So you're living proof that Ohio
Yeah.
exists. And we've known each other for longer than either of us will care to admit. Going back to initial Chicago social media days. So why don't you give the viewers maybe a couple minute of the Sean McGinnis career arc and what got you from Chicago to Cleveland?
Oh my gosh. I've often said that I just feel like a hired gun. And so, unlike most people, if there's an opportunity that can advance the career or where I can learn something new, I'm always up for it. And so, I think being open to those discussions has led to a very kind of meandering career arc where I change positions, I change companies, and I also change locations quite frequently. So we've moved all over the country. I've taken 5 corporate relos, always funded by a new employer. A couple of them with the same first employer when I first moved into management. So my first 2 management roles were required to move. That was the initial moved from Chicago to Pittsburgh, and then from Pittsburgh to Minneapolis area. Then we moved back to Chicago for about 6 years. Then we were in Salt Lake, and now here to Cleveland. So always a new role, always a new adventure. Thankfully, my wife allows for it, and the kids didn't seem to suffer too badly. Although I'm sure they're going to be a little bit abnormal in some strange ways. But it's always been all over the board. A variety of different roles from sales and sales management to marketing, always digital for the most part, kind of some general management roles, eventually kind of ascending to CMO and then president of an e-com business. And the last couple of years have been, or a little over a year, has been pretty heavy in the direct response marketing world. So still e-com, but a different flavor of e-com. So that's the day job. I do a little bit of consulting on the side typically for founders, mostly in the e-commerce space because that's where the network lives today. Just heavily networked as always. And then the Manager Vault is kind of the fresh passion project, I would say.
So excuse me, well, I gotta kick in this. This is non-alcoholic Topo Chico, so it's not a sponsor of the program. But I felt like I was going to choke when I was asking that last question. I pride myself in being authentic, and I guess that goes with the territory.
Sure.
What I was going to ask is that your cohort in the launch of the Manager Vault is Ashley Walton.
Yeah. Yep. Ashley and I work together.
Yeah. Go ahead and tell us what got you to the point of saying, "Hey, we need to do this."
Well, it's a good question. So honestly, I think I probably attribute it to between watching YouTube videos and TikTok and other things where you hear these kind of biz op ideas where people go, "Oh my gosh, it doesn't take much to start a business these days. You should start a newsletter or start this type of thing or that type of thing." And Ashley and I worked together. I met her back in 2015. She was part of my team that I managed when I moved from Chicago out to Salt Lake initially. There's a 150 person organization or so that I wound up being the leader over the whole marketing organization, and she was one of my directs. And I promoted her from manager to director, and we grew really close together. We just tend to operate in a very kind of similar wavelength. We just see eye to eye about a lot of different things. And we stayed very close after our working relationship ended. So, periodically every 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, one of us would reach out and we'd get on a call and just kind of catch up. And so I would sometimes text her or message her like, "Oh, we should start a business together," and she was like, "Yeah, yeah." And then it turned all of a sudden serious when I kind of proposed the idea of like, I want to do a newsletter about teaching people how to manage. She goes, "Oh my gosh, I would totally do that with you." So that's how we got here, between she and I at least, and I think underneath that question is kind of why management, probably, right?
Yeah.
And um, you've seen the old Ikigai Venn diagram, right? Do what the things that you love, the things that the world needs, the things that someone will pay you for, and the things you're good at, right? If when those four things overlap, you've got something really special. The only thing that's yet to be proven with that is whether or not it's something that anyone will pay us for. But every place I've ever been, from a corporate setting, I get feedback very consistently that I'm a very, very strong people manager. And I think a good bit of that comes from taking very seriously the notion that managing people is a unique skill that you kind of have to learn. Some people are born with leadership traits, or you're born leaders. You've heard that phrase a million times, and there's certainly an aspect to or elements of that are true. But from the very minute that I was first given my first team to lead, and that would have been in 2003, I've very seriously taken the idea that it is something unique. And so it's something I've studied, it's something I've read up on, it's something that I've watched a lot of videos and listened to tons of podcasts about, kind of cut my teeth and revised my approach down through the years. And it's had a lot of, I would give it a lot of credit to my various different business successes, to the degree I've had any. It's a big part of my career, is really learning that as a unique skill, and then also turning around teaching that to people that are on my team who also manage people. And so what we're really doing is trying to document our various journeys from a managerial perspective, and to share everything that we know. We're just kind of opening up the kimono, so to speak, and documenting every crazy idea that has worked down through the years. It's going to take a while to get it all out. We're only 5 weeks or so into this, 4 to 6 weeks into this, and we publish twice a week. And she writes, and we publish her articles on Tuesday and mine on Thursdays, and it's free to join. So we're just sharing everything we know, topic by topic by topic. We brainstormed a couple hundred different topical ideas, and they're just kind of waiting in the wings. And as you do with anything like this, you produce as much as you can ahead of time and refine it and get it ready, and then you push the go button, and it goes live. So it's great.
And what sort of feedback have you been getting so far?
Yeah, it's been really, really wonderful. I mean, we've as it always goes with these things, it always starts with your existing network. I've been putting the word out slowly. There's a couple of, probably close to 100 or 150 that I initially reached out for, just to let them know that it was coming. And then we finally published. We had a big burst of new subscriber activity that kind of jumped in. And I've been trying to be in the habit of messaging 10 contacts a day, just letting them know. You don't want to overdo it and kind of like message 20,000 people, spam malicious type of thing. But and then as your word gets out and people start to learn what you're doing, it tends to grow. It'll snowball. We've got about 150 subscribers, so we're still very, very early. We haven't done anything in terms of paid acquisition, but that's down the line. We've got a whole mental model of what we think this could turn into, but until any of it's proven, it's all just digital ink on paper, so to speak. It's just all in our heads.
And so let's talk about the nitty gritty of what some of the advice is, because I took some notes, have been one of those early subscribers, and I found it really interesting that you were talking on one of the episodes about the advantage of having a career document versus a resume.
Yeah.
So tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think it's just an approach that I've taken for a long time. The hard part about building a resume is we forget, right? We document the biggest things that happen in any given role. If I asked you to get specific about exactly what you achieved at X or Y role. And, let's say they go back to the day we met in 2001 or whenever it was. Hey, Dave, you were in this role. Like, what did you accomplish? Right? It's the only thing you'd have to look back on is probably the history of resumes that you have somewhere along the line. And so, if you were a new manager coming out, and this is what we've talked about, is I encourage people to document on a quarterly basis. Go through and just write down every single thing you've accomplished. Include the numbers. In work, all of us are working towards certain outcomes, and those outcomes are either to make money, save money, become more efficient, achieve a portion of a project. Whatever those things were that got done each quarter, document them. And document them in a running career document that eventually becomes 3, 5, 7, 10 pages long. Because every quarter you're updating it with the 2, 3, 4 most important things, including metrics, including growth numbers. I mean, had I done that since the beginning of my career, my document would be really long because I would have done a lot of different things over the years. And then what that career document becomes is the source information for the resume that you build. So that's the raw fodder that kind of sits off to the side. It's the ingredient list that you have to pull from when you want to make the souffle or the cake that's really going to impress, someone who's looking to hire someone for a role that you're a good fit for. So the next step is, once you've got all that kind of sitting in the side, you read the job description, you look through and pick out the 6 or 8 primary responsibilities or skills that they're actually looking for. You go back to your document and you look through it and say, well, which ones best illustrate that? And not only the data, but that have the story behind it that you can bring out in an interview, right? So it becomes a holistic mechanism, and you're thinking about, oh, they're looking for this skill. I've got 5 data points that kind of illustrate that, but this story might be the best story because then I can talk about this role that I played, or can talk about the specifics because of the nuance of what they're looking for, right? You pull all those different bullet points then into the resume so that the resume is custom tailored to each job that you're applying for. As opposed to, here's Dave and it's 2 pages and it's the same resume you send out to 50 or 100 people. You make each one a little bit unique based on it takes a little bit of effort. But in an ideal world, you've got I think one of the things that prevents us from doing that is we don't have the raw ingredients documented over the 10, 15, 20-year history of our career, right? So I just really encourage everyone to take a couple hours once a quarter and document all those things that you've accomplished in the prior quarter.
So if I'm somebody, this is one of those asking for a friend moments, but I'm someone in a career that is not as numbers and metrics focused as others. So if you talk about public relations or corporate communications, most of the time your goals are going to be amorphous. Unless you're working in an agency environment and you have to say, I build 50 hours a week for 52 weeks this year, or whatever the metric is. But if you're in an environment, let's say you're a current manager, you're in an environment where you don't have those sorts of numbers readily asked for at your disposal, what's your advice for people who are working in those sorts of roles?
Yeah, I think there's always work being completed, right? So whether that's press releases that are issued, or it's speeches that are written, or it's crises that were dealt with, and we put in place new processes because we learned from something. Like, all of that happens, and so it's documenting whatever happens in that workflow, right? In a creative role, we have all this work. When I'm hiring a designer, the designer usually comes with their portfolio. Where's that portfolio come? It's coming from their prior work, right? And so when it's a creative output, we take pride in it and we document it. when it's a sales specific thing, we document it and we talk about, here's the numbers that I drove, or the percent to quota that I achieved, or what have you. That work is happening in every aspect of the organization, whether it's finance. There's something that happened that you got through, 3 years running without ever missing a close deadline. The work happens, right? And so it's really about the work, and whatever the work can, whether it's the real work or the output of the work that you're tracking, that can then demonstrate, I'm looking to hire someone that does that. Here's my example of that, right?
Setting expectations is something that you said in one of your episodes, editions of the newsletter, was really important, and difficult for people to do, especially if they've just moved into a leadership role.
Yeah.
Walk me through that.
Yeah, it's just the thing that I've seen over and over and over again is when you can be an incredible employee, right? And if you're not a manager, most likely your work output is being dictated to you. Here's what I expect of you. So your prior managers, and this really breaks into another theme that we've at least talked about. And one of the things that I think, I don't know if it's unique or not, but what I believe to be true is that unless or until you start actually studying this stuff, all you have to pull from is your prior managers. So you see the good and you see the bad. You say like, Dave was my manager and I loved the fact that he did X, or Sean was my manager and I hated the fact that he used to do Y. So if I ever become a manager, I'm never going to do that. I literally remember having that very thought. My first manager ever out of college, I was selling cars, and the first guy, he was great in some ways. And when I announced that I was leaving, he threw a fit. And I literally vowed to myself at whatever it was, 22 years old, if I ever get in that position, I'm never going to be that guy. And so that influences how I treat people when they're leaving the organization or announce that they're leaving my team. And so I just think that one of the things that you never know how to do until you've done it is to really clearly set expectations for what good looks like for your team and for your employees, right? I've seen it every place I've gone. I won't get into the specifics of when, but I ran into a situation at one point in my career when I inherited a team, and I got with one of the guys, and I said, like, what are you supposed to be working on? Like, what are you being held accountable to? And he couldn't answer because no one had clearly told him before. It was like, you're hired and you're doing a bunch of different work, and no one really said, like, here's what I'm expecting of you, right? Here's the four corners of the document. Here's exactly what I want you to be accountable for. Here's where I see that you're weak. Here's what I need you to go work on to improve. That kind of feedback was never given to them. And so I just think it's really important to basically define. I say that a lot of times that the main role of any people manager is to set high accountabilities and to hold those people accountable for those outcomes. You just set really, really high standards and you push people to get there, sometimes beyond what they think they're capable of. And sometimes you have to give them a lot of help along the way, whether that be training or feedback. You can send them off, to different conferences or courses. You can hook them up with a mentor. If I've never done certain things, but a lot of times the answer isn't coming from me. It's just connecting people with other folks that I happen to know through the many years of my career of like, oh, I know exactly someone I can put you in touch with who's done that before, right? And I connect a couple people up, and people are always willing to share their expertise, and things work out. Excuse me.
What do you think that modern managers are missing in the whole equation, working with teams? Let's say you got a few direct reports and you want to make sure that they grow, but you're also being challenged by your boss to deliver on certain objectives. What are managers missing in this whole dynamic?
I think a lot of things. One of the things that I see missing quite frequently is context, right? Why is it that we're doing certain things? That's one of the things I really like to do is to pause. Excuse me, I got a throat tickle. And explain like why we're doing something. So connecting it to the mission of the business or the vision of where we're trying to go. I think that can go a long way to, helping to get people where you want them to be.
I'd offer you some of my drink. Were I able to do that? I've actually thought about in my office getting it. This will give you a chance to collect your voice. I thought about in my office getting a little Keurig, like a really cheap Keurig. I know people yell at the Keurig because it's not good coffee, but right. my biggest, so this is a little on the personal development side for me, but my biggest problem is that I have to have the coffee in the morning as soon as possible. So I'll go downstairs start the coffee maker and stay downstairs and wait for the coffee maker to get done. And then next thing you know, I've invested an hour with the morning coffee. When what I really need to be doing is getting a Keurig and putting it in my office so that the first thing I do is hit start on the Keurig, and then a couple minutes later, I've got my first cup of coffee, and then I can start focusing on something in the office and be accountable to getting something done. So that's I guess a management tip that I'm gonna share.
Time management.
Yeah, time management tip. I haven't done it yet, but I've told myself that I'm going to do it.
I've
But
done that. I used to bring my Keurig into the office, so it was
okay,
in my spot. Like,
perfect.
yeah,
And then you get the office police, and we've had this happen a few times in my career where facilities will start walking around and being like, "Wait a minute, you've got your own coffee maker. That's not how we do things around here.
right.
You've got your own your own mini fridge. That's not how we do things around here either."
So I literally reached into my mini fridge and grabbed my little can of soda.
More power to you. But let's talk about that context piece a little bit, because I think one of the things, and I noticed this, I think it was a well, the cursive context was one of the things that you all wrote about. I can't remember if it was you or if it was Ashley.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but the that seemed to be one of the challenges I've had maybe recently in jobs where you're being told that this has to be done, but there's no why behind it, and there's
Yeah.
no real reasoning for whatever the decision is. So how do you navigate through, especially in an environment perhaps where you're being told to do one thing and you're not sure it's the right
Right.
thing, but you're working in lockstep with your fellow managers, and you need to make sure that this gets done for the good of the organization.
Yeah, my guess is that's one of the reasons that I get so much positive feedback is it usually comes from my team. And it's because I always give a lot of context. It's because I'm more than willing to talk about here's the thought process that went into this decision making, and here's why we decided what we did as a leadership team, and that's what's now driving the move in this direction or whatever the work outcome is. And Ashley and I just both happen to believe that. I mean, the weird part is she probably learned it from me because we worked very closely together for a bit of time. And I think we just both believe that it's really important. The problem is, for me personally, this is my problem, is my default mode is to try and explain almost everything. And there's some things that just don't need to be shared, right? When you're a leader, there are decisions that people don't need to know about. Ashley and I were kind of silently reminiscing about a situation where we had to dismiss someone on her team back in the day, and people really wanted to know why. And it's like, we're not going to tell you why. That's an HR issue. Like that's not something that will ever get shared. You can, squawk all you want and assume the worst of both of us. It doesn't matter. Like we know what happened and we know why it happened. And it's not for you to have, you don't get to have a say. You don't get to have an opinion about that. But in most other cases, what I usually say to people, if you were reporting me, Dave, I'd say the same thing to you as I say to everybody, which is like, my default mode is to share everything with you, except the stuff I can't share. And so there are certain things that I just can't, but if there's something that's worth sharing, I'm going to share it. And the other thing that I think is really important, we haven't even really written about this yet, but it's so important to tie back the work that we're doing as individual contributors or part of a team and how that fits into the larger direction that the business is going, right? So it's imperative on a good leader to kind of always talk about, hey, this is the work we're doing, and here's how it fits. Here's why it's important. Here's what it's doing in terms of taking us in the direction that we're going. When I'm sitting in the seat, whether it's kind of COO or president or whatever, I always say, like, my job is to steer the boat. The CEO's job is to be at the front of the boat, pointing the direction. And part of my job is to make sure that everyone's rowing in the same direction, the same cadence. So we're going to get there as fast as possible and as efficiently as possible. In a small organization, that's easier to do. In these big publicly traded companies, it's a lot harder, as you're aware. It's such an important piece to get that communication piece right. It's easier to do when it's 50 or 100 people, right?
What's your take on the proliferation of really silly buzzwords?
You got some examples for me?
Let's leverage this, which I think gets overused.
Yeah, I'm probably as guilty as the next person when it comes to using those things because in leadership meetings, that's the way we're talking about things, and the concept of leverage is a meaningful one, right? Like we don't use it without reason, and the idea of, like, I know some people don't appreciate words like "let's circle back on this" or whatever. Like, we're literally going to circle back on it. Like, we're going to talk about it now. We're going to set it aside. We're going to go do a bunch of work, and in 2 weeks we're going to circle back and talk about it again, right? How you say it doesn't matter to me. Like, I've never been. I think it's people just want to have something to bitch about when they're bitch about some of that stuff. Like, honestly, like it's like office gossip, right? People are going to find something to talk about and complain about, and one of the hot button topics of the moment is these buzzwords that people get all twisted up about.
I probably should have utilized a different question, which that's one of the ones.
Well, here's the other, the somewhat related complaint that I've often had, and yet I'm just as guilty of it. I remember back to one of my first days at Sears, one of my colleagues handed me like a 4-page printed document. I took a look at it, and it was maybe a couple weeks in, and in it was all the unique cultural buzzwords that they used, all of the shorthand, all of the TLAs, the 3-letter acronyms, right? Like, we call this, and here's the explanation for exactly what it means. And it was super useful at the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I needed this at every place I've ever been, because without it, it takes you 6 months to absorb all that. And you feel like an idiot asking, like, what does that mean? Or what does this mean? And so it's, again, part of that contextual sharing of, like, this is the culture, and this is how we get this work done, and this is how we talk about these things. We apply these labels, and it becomes part of an internal cultural narrative that the business has developed over the years. And everyone that's part of the fabric of that business knows it, and you're the outsider. So you're constantly reminded that you're the outsider without having that handed to you. And it's part of a really good onboarding process that someone actually thinks that far ahead and says, like, hey, I really think you could benefit from having a document like this, right?
You mentioned culture. What are the keys for managers in building, nurturing a company culture, rebuilding a culture that may be a little on the let's say wobbly side? Not completely broken, but
Yeah.
what are some of the key thoughts you have on that?
Honestly, I wish I knew. I at a not too distant in my past role, I actually joined a business that I was kind of warned coming in had a pretty toxic culture, and when I left there a couple years later, one of my guys that I hired was talking about the impact I had on the culture there, and it really did improve. And I couldn't tell you what I did, other than be performance folk. All the things we're going to talk about in the manager vault, right? Like, gave people feedback, good and bad, held them accountable, didn't fly off the handle. Was not an emotional manager by any stretch, except like excitable sometimes. Like, when we see an opportunity and you want to convey the excitement of what's sitting in front of us, but never like freaking out on people and screaming. None of that ever. Created a performance-oriented culture. When I joined the business, there was a whiteboard right behind me, and all of my team was in this big room, almost like a little miniature gymnasium. And the way that I got everyone focused on performance was I walked in every morning and wrote the number of orders we took the prior day in big letters, and then like encircled it with like a little, a kind of a doily figure, and we would just change it every single day. And that became a focus for all of us, and we kind of talked about it, and it became part of the conversation. But I think in every good team or business, it's a combination of all the right people doing the right work. It's a combination of a shared set of reporting documents where there's a source of truth that everyone agrees to is the real truth and the way that you're going to run the business, and there's no surprises when it comes to that. The other thing I like to do, and we haven't even written about this yet, but I wouldn't call it a trick, but one of the ways that I just took control of the narrative in almost every business I've been part of is on Monday mornings I write an email. I call it the weekly performance report, and I share up, and then I would share down. So it's everyone in my team that was a department head that reported directly to me, and the CEO of the business got this email. It was the exact same format every Monday. It's like, here's what happened last week, good and bad. And then here's all the stuff we're planning to work on this week and get accomplished this week that I know of, right? You don't know everything in the business, but here's a new hire that's scheduled to start. Here's how the hiring process is going. We've rejected a couple candidates and we're down to the final three. Like, it was basically a full brain dump for everything that I knew that was happening inside the business. It became like a weekly diary. And so, my boss, then the CEO, was never uninformed about what was happening in the business because I ensured that everything that I wanted that person to know got included in my weekly email. But I also wasn't afraid to share that down. So my team saw the exact same email. They were part of the distribution list.
Yeah, and I think that's really important too. I've been places where you arrive and you realize that there are some managers, and this goes back quite a bit for me in this environment, but I remember joining an organization and having somebody say, this was within the first week, wait, they never told us this sort of thing before. It's like, what do you mean? And you find out that somebody is in the habit of controlling information and not sharing it. They will hear it from above, but they will not share it down because you are put on a need to know basis. And guess what? Everybody signs all sorts of employment agreements when they join an organization, and they should know that if it's, first of all, back to your need to know basis thing before, if you cannot tell us, then you cannot tell us. But when there are exceptions, and all of these things I was sharing was just, I just heard this, and well, we've been working on that for a year and a half, and nobody had told us that was going to happen at all. Thank you. Right. But I guess when you hit an organization like that, what's your message to people when it's like, I need more information, I need to be able to share the context, but leadership is holding on to this, and I can't. What's your advice?
I mean, if you know something that's going to happen and leadership has instructed you not to tell your team, then the answer is just, I can't tell, I can't share, right? Like,
that's one thing. That's one thing. But
if you're trying to pull information out of leadership, is that the alternative?
Yeah.
Suggesting. Yeah, I think then you have a conversation with your boss or your boss's boss, like, hey, it'd be really great if we could find out the following information, and then putting in the context of like, here's how it will help us do a better job, right? In order for us to be really effective, we need to know X, and you better have a good case for why you really need to know. I think it seems to me that the larger the organization, the harder it is to pull that information out, because there's an assumption that certain things are just shared with senior leadership and maybe a layer down. There are certain things like acquisition discussions, or we're getting ready to put the business up for sale. Like, that should never be shared, right, until it needs to be shared, because you need to control the timing, and you don't want things to get out on the street if you're public or other things. But
right,
that's where my instinct needs to be reined in, right? Like, there's certain things like I've got to remember I can't share X. But the other thing I think that makes that instinct good and this took me a while to learn, honestly, is, when you're an individual contributor and you're in a meeting, your only thought is like, I'm listening so that I know what I need to know, right? And when you're a manager and you're in a meeting, you're in part listening for what you need to cascade to your team. And it's really easy to in your first 6 months or a year or even 18 months to like forget to do that. Like that's a basic managerial function. But when your world was this big and now it's this big, it's hard to remember that part of the job was to share that stuff with your team. It's really easy to forget, in all honesty. Like I can think back to my very first role as a sales manager. An email comes to you, one of your, I'm reading it to understand, but the next question is this something I can or should cascade, right? Or rewrite and share a portion of, or let my team know on our, weekly check-in call or whatever. It's hard. It's just hard. And that's part and parcel of why management is a unique skill set that you really need to learn and just take seriously as a unique skill.
What other pieces of advice, as we wind down this discussion, what other pieces of advice would you share with people?
Oh my gosh, I could go for years, and we will. um, I think. Well, here's I guess a nugget of wisdom. If you want to be a dangerous interviewer, learn how to, or interviewee, learn how to be a great interviewer. So by learning how to interview people as if you were going to hire them, you learn what questions are typically going to be asked based on a job description. Literally, I'll never forget. What was this for? It was for I'd taken my first management role, and I found out about another opportunity, which was kind of a general management role, and the HR person interviewed me for that. And she finished up. She's like, "That's the best interview I've ever conducted. Like, what's going on?" I said, "Well, I literally just got through all of your training teaching me how to interview. So I literally can look at a job description as though I'm the hiring manager and pull out exactly those questions that I know you're going to ask, and then make sure that I've got a story ready to illustrate that skill or illustrate that point or why it might be a good fit." And so it's just I think a skill that a lot of people don't think about, connecting those dots. That if you're a hiring manager, you have to learn how to write a job description. You'll have to learn how to conduct an interview. You have to, and there's corporate trainings that I went through for all that. And it just tends to make you a very dangerous, candidate as well, if you really sit down and apply yourself in it.
Is that because of the you're basing the questions off of the job description, and that's
100%.
something that not a lot of people do, because I've noticed that they places I've been at, and there have been quite a few of them that have done this, where it's more kind of that philosophical type. Tell me about and what you really want to know from the person is, we're hiring you for X. We're considering hiring you for X. X means you have to know how to do A, B, and C. Let's talk about A. When's the last time you did A, and how did that work?
Yes, with a wrinkle. So at least the way I conduct interviews, and if you were to hire me to say, "Hey, help me," like I think I'm a really great hiring manager because I've almost never made a bad hire. Like when I was a sales manager, I batted about 500. There were a couple people that I hired that were stone cold killers that I was so grateful that I hired, and there are a couple of people like, I want to fire that person inside of like 5 weeks. It's just bad hire. And then when I moved into my corporate role, I probably batted like 800. Like I very rarely make a bad hire. But my process is, the first thing that I think about is like, what is the actual job I'm hiring this person to do, and like clearly defining the role, because there's versions of almost every role you can hire, right? If I'm going to hire a creative strategist, it can be, no, I want someone who's just thinking of the idea. No, I want a production person who's also going to be creating the creative that's going to go in the ads on Meta. Or I'm hiring a media buyer. Like there's types, and then also like gaining alignment internally around, like, let's say we're hiring a media buyer. there's 3 to 5 things that you want to be sure of. I want someone who spent X dollars in volume on a monthly basis. Or no, it absolutely has to have someone who's from this vertical because there's something unique about this business. We sell supplements, and that's a really hard thing to sell online. I need to make sure that the media buyer we hire has done that before, right? Getting alignment on that is really critical as well. Then the next thing that I do is I sit down and I write the role scorecard. Here's what I'm going to hold that person accountable for when I onboard them. I'm literally going to hand them this document, but again, gaining alignment internally with that for all the different stakeholders. And then I write my job interview questions, and those interview questions are tied to the primary skills that we have to have. And in any the tendency for most people is to overdo the wish list. So you get a wish list that's a unicorn, but also a unicorn that has a blue beak on. Like there's just you can I want this, and I want this. It's like they're at a smorgasbord and they want a little bit of everything. It's like, okay, hang on. Like what are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves when it comes to these skills? And just focus on like 3 to 5, and make sure you write out really good behavioral interview questions on that. Hey, Dave, tell me about a time when you did this specific thing. What was the thing that you did, and tell me about the outcome, and then keep following up and following up and following up on those questions. Dig deeper. Well, what role did you play in that project? Right? Yeah, making sure that I really understand the impact you had and how you were tied to the outcome that actually happened. But the other thing that's really important is you have to interview for culture fit. And that's usually expressed through corporate values. And if a company is really, really clear about the values that they're looking for, and those values are documented and they're used frequently to talk about it inside the business, you should be hiring, firing, rewarding, compensation, giving feedback, all based on those values as well. So you've got to interview for those up front. So you have to come up with interview questions that try to elicit, okay, I'm curious. Well, Dave, tell me about a time when you had to learn something new. And you had to explain that to someone else. Like whatever it is I need to know, I'm gonna have an interview question waiting for those things as well. And then ultimately you make a decision, yes or no, based on how that candidate's answering those questions. But those questions should be consistently asked of every candidate, if at all possible, as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas that companies really have gone off the rails is the lack of clarity on the front end, not just with job descriptions, which are of vital importance. Not only, I mean, you were talking about the you're writing this for a unicorn, but you need to really pare it down. But companies
Right.
really mess that up a lot in the job description that they're writing. But then getting the alignment on, well, what will this person actually be doing day to day, and
Yeah.
how do I get at exactly whether or not they're both a cultural fit, and do they have the skills that are important?
Sure. Yeah, I've been operating a lot in smaller companies lately, right? And I think you've been probably operating in much larger organizations than I have. It's just, and not every company does this effectively, but in my experience, I think it's really crucial to have those values in mind. I've been operating a number of businesses using this system called EOS, which stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And one of the things that they talk about is you need to have the right people in the right seats, and the right people is a values question. And if you don't have the right value, and as an owner or as a CEO, having all the right people in the organization that are great values fits transforms your business. It becomes a joy to come to work every day because you're surrounded by people who value the same things that you do, who kind of behave roughly in the same way that you do. And if they don't, then they're probably not a fit for the organization. And that's a hard thing to hear. So you can have a really, really skilled person who just doesn't fit inside where we're trying to take the business. And even if they may be an A plus player and you replace them with the B, sometimes the business gets better results because everyone is aligned from that values perspective, right? That's a lot harder to do when you have 400,000 employees or whatever. It's but it's a tenet that I think a lot of people quietly believe, but then don't necessarily execute in practice. It's easy to say and hard to do, right?
Yeah, it's the old, we've both operated in startup environments. It's the old, I'd rather have an A team with a B idea concept that, and I think we've been there before. You're reminding me a little bit of the Jim Collins. I don't know if it was Good to Great or Built to Last, where the concept was you got to get the right people on the bus first. And then once you've got them on the bus, it's okay to kind of move people around different directions. You go over here, you go over there, but you got that values based question answered already. And you can usually tell rather early in discussions with somebody. We've interviewed people, both of us, and I mean, like within 10 seconds, okay, I looked at the resume and I met this person, and this is somebody who's going to be a cultural fit. I can just tell.
Right.
And now we got to figure out whether or not the skills are attributable.
Yeah,
Or
I
can
think that
be activated.
the work that really defines the cultural fit is that portion about clearly defining the values, right? Because it's really easy or tempting, you know, to define a culture fit as like we just want people who are going to work hard. Well, there's more to it than that. That might be one of your values. We don't go home before 10 p.m. or it's 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, like whatever. Like whatever that can be a value. It can't be the only value. There has to be more than that, right? And the I can't imagine starting a business from scratch and trying to define the values. At that point, it becomes your personal values that you're kind of documenting more than anything. In an organization that's been around for a while, when you document those values, it's very common to say you put the whole their senior leadership team in place, and you say like bring to the table the top 2 to 3 people that everyone in the business can't get enough of. That you'd say if I can run them through a cloning machine, I would do it 10,000 times, and we'd have a perfect organization. And then you whiteboard and ideate all the things that they bring to the table every day in their work. And then you whittle that down to the top 3 to 5 things, and that becomes your corporate values, right? I've seen that exercise completed a couple times. It's a lot of fun to go through. And it's usually incredibly obvious and damn near uniformly unanimous of like who those people are that you want to hold up as, the symbol of what you really want to work around. And having a good interview question for each one of those is important. And so I'm coming back to your question about like these floofy questions that are hard to, maybe they were focused on values. Maybe they were something. That's the one thing I would say, please don't do. Don't pick up on the latest fad because someone wrote a book, like, oh, well, you're not Google. You're just not. And so, when the former HR guy from Google goes off and writes a book, don't just adopt it because the Google guy wrote a book. If you read it and like it and you think it applies to your business, go ahead and adopt it. But, I've been in organizations that tried to change my hiring process, and I'm like, I'll let you change it when I start making bad hires. I'm really, really good at hiring, and I would much rather continue to run the process that I know right now is working well. And and the specific Google situation was like for the longest time, and I think Google still does this. They don't allow the hiring manager to make the final call on who they're going to hire. It gets decided by a different panel because those panels are screening and interviewing for certain things, and they claim that that's how they get diverse workforces and things of that nature. And then that hiring manager is then held accountable for managing a person that they didn't ultimately decide to hire, right? There's probably more to it than that, but I was like, we're not Google. That was my feedback on that one.
Yeah, and I've been places where I don't think it was radical candor, but it was a book like that. about the very strong-willed conversations that are very important to growing the business. And that's how we operate around here. And then, and this again goes back, this is not recent experience, but you get there and you realize we are not allowed to have these radical, candid conversations with leadership because they will completely rip us apart. So, I guess what I'm
Yeah.
getting to here is if you're in a place and you realize that this is something's wrong and you're a manager and you know you've got like this sunk cost fallacy of, well, I already, invested X amount of
Right.
time or whatever. What at what point do you say, okay, it is time. It is time to move on. When do you make that calculation?
Yeah, it's a tricky one for me. I try to only make the call and join an organization that I believe in, whenever possible, and um, th- those hard conversations happen on occasion for sure. I mean, um, it, it- there are times when I've left an organization where I'm like, oh, it feels like it's premature, and there are some times when a conversation happens, you go like, yeah, now's the right time. Um, it, I'm trying to think back to when I'm not at the level that I'm at now. Like right now at my level, it's like if you're a CEO and you don't want me on the team, like I don't want to be there. Like it's a very simple conversation to have. If you don't think I'm delivering on the promise and you're not getting value for money, then what are we doing? I don't want to be. But I also would, prefer to have a conversation where you're giving me feedback and we're agreeing on what needs to be worked on, and um, again through that communication channel, you like the work that's happening, and we're all moving in the same direction in a way that makes sense. Um, but as a manager, I mean, ultimately you make the choice of where you want to be and who you want to invest in, and what you want to be doing with your time. And so if you view it as an opportunity to learn from your boss, but maybe you don't like the direction the business is going, ultimately that's a choice that you have to make. I'm working for someone that I love working for, but I don't like what we make, or I don't like who we sell to, or whatever. That's just a series of judgment calls that every individual has to make along the way, right? And I would never begrudge anyone. It's again why I try to never be grumpy when someone says they're leaving, because they've all got their own reasons. And I believe that as a manager, it's my core responsibility to develop my team so they're ready to take the next step in their career. Like that's the thing that I focus on. That's my managerial philosophy, for lack of a better word. I don't do it uniformly. I'm not like the greatest in the world at it. Um, but when I'm successful at it, that means that those people are more valuable to the organization. And it also means that they're developing their careers probably. And in a perfect world, they would find an opening on my team, and that I would have a need that fits with their new capabilities, right? Sometimes that's not possible. In Ashley's case, it's a great example. I was absolutely ready to make her a VP on my team, and a VP role opened up on the other side of the business, working for another former direct report of mine, and she was concerned, and we talked it through. And at the end of the day, she took the role. It was the best decision she's ever made, probably. She learned a ton of new stuff, expanded her capabilities in a way that is just mind blowing to me over the next 2, 3 years. And that's why she's now a multiple time CMO and working for an organization that's got thousands of employees in that role. She's super capable. Um, and so, ultimately, you have to make those calls as an employee about, am I in a good place? Does the comp match what I'm contributing? Is there a future ahead for my career, and is there a future for the business? Like all of those things are going into a pretty regular calculation, I think, in every employee's mind.
And I guess the last question is, we're both Gen Xers and it's a weird market. It's a weird job market. What's your advice specifically for the Gen X types who are out there looking for their next thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my advice is to focus on your contributions and focus on all the things that you can do. Um, Stay away from the negativity to the degree that you possibly can, and um, find a fit that is going to keep you excited and that will value what you bring to the table. Experience is a very valuable thing. Um, we're constantly looking for people that have 8 or 10 years of something. And if you've got, 15 or 20 and you're willing to work for the wage that someone who's done it for 8 or 10 years, it seems like a win-win to me. So to me, that's the way I would position it, is like, hey, I've got all the same skills you're looking for in someone who's younger and is willing to do it, and I'm willing to work for that same compensation. There are times in our life when we're trying to grow, and there's times in our life when we're willing to slow down a little bit. And it's the what's the old analogy? You pay a partner's time at a law firm. They're more valuable. Why? Because they've been through it. They know how to do it much more efficiently. They've got templates they can draw from if it's drawing up a contract or whatever. They know all the pitfalls. There's value placed for a reason. But if you're willing to work for the wage of an associate, who wouldn't want someone with the skills of a partner to be working for the compensation of an associate? I think it's definitely harder. I mean, it's the higher you go in an organization, the longer it takes to find a replacement. That's the equal comp, no doubt about it. So if you've done a C-suite job before, you can count on sometimes 2 years looking for the next role that's a really good fit for you. So it's that's regardless of what generation you're a part of, right?
Absolutely. Where can we find the Manager Vault?
We're on the managervault.com. We share all of our stuff. You can follow me on social media. I'm on X at Sean McGinnis. You can find me on LinkedIn and follow me there or connect with me there. I'm glad to make your acquaintance and answer any questions you might have. I'm as active as I can be, having a full-time job, but also kind of digging in. And we take requests. We do a podcast every week as well. We try to when we can get together, and we've got a lot to share. I'm just wrapping up a hiring guide for hiring managers to teach them everything I know about hiring. It's 83 pages of content. So I've been working on it for 6 weeks, probably in the after hours and the weekends, and I think it's just about ready to go live. So keep an eye out for that. But find us on themanagervault.com, spelled just like it sounds, and subscribe there. I try to remember to take everything from the regular newsletter and republish it on Substack. So if you prefer Substack, hunt us down there, and you can find usually most of the same content, maybe a day later.
Sean McGinnis, thanks for joining us on the Vandy Program.
Yeah, good to see you, Dave.